Welcome again, Soaring Sisters. Once again, we're going to be taking a look at IGC Spy and how I managed to improve my thermaling in a competition in a single flight. Welcome, Soaring Sisters, to this episode, our second on IGC Spy, which is a fabulous tool for analysing your flights, unlike any other tool that I've seen. I was talking to a number of pilots at the Lake Keepit Grand Prix just gone, where I was competing. And those included some really high-level pilots. Brad Edwards was there, and they all agree that this tool is really, really unique. And I want to share with you how I managed to analyze a previous Grand Prix flight, determine the two main areas where I was losing time, which was thermaling and deviations. And from the analysis, I could determine that my thermaling was poorer than it needed to be, or my climb rate was poorer than it needed to be, because of my angle of bank. And that's what I worked on, and I managed to gain a heck of a lot of time. IGC Spy has a tool called Orbit Time, and when you use that tool in conjunction with your thermaling speed in knots and your climb rate, you can work out why it is that you're not climbing so well. So now what I'm going to go on and concentrate on is deviations. But before we get into that, let's get into this episode. Okay, so I'll reiterate, if you haven't watched the previous episode introducing IGC Spy, please go and do that before you watch this one, because this won't make as much sense if you don't. And what I'm introducing to you here is how I managed to improve my flying in a single flight using the tools that IGC provides. And I'm using the previous flight that I analysed in IGC Spy in the previous episode and comparing it to this particular flight, which was day 4 of the Lake Keepit GP. Now I'm choosing day 4 because the other 3 days I actually had a number of issues. One where my IGC loggers didn't provide a valid trace. I outlanded on another day, and there were a bunch of other reasons. But this is the first really good flight that I had where I could actually use the information that I'd gathered previously from analysing with IGC Spy. So you have a look at all of the different gliders involved here: PIC 20, Grub 101, ASW 24, LS6, LAC 19 FES, Speed Aster, SD 55-1, Discus, LS8, and so on. Now, to give you a little bit of context here, before I come and look at these numbers, I'm going to introduce you to the flight on the day. And I'll help you understand the local sort of topography, etc. For those of you who don't know the area where the Women's Worlds was held, the 10th Women's Worlds. So we take off from a place called Lake Keepit, and on this particular day I took a climb over here near the Carroll Range and went across the start line, which doesn't show here properly, but went across the start line somewhere in sort of this outer region here. And what was interesting about this flight was I was approached before it by a relatively new pilot, something like 150 hours, but owned a JS3. And he said, let's fly together because I don't want to fly with the big wings today. Now, if you understand performance of gliders, you'll know that the Pegasus is a long, long way short of a JS3. So I was a little concerned about that, but he said, look, I'll wait for you at various places and I'll just have some fun. Then a third person wanted to fly with us as well, and they were in an LS6, I think. Don't think it was an LS8. And so those two kind of set off at a pace that I couldn't keep up with, and I felt compelled to try. And I shouldn't have, because our GPs are set up with different size cans at each turn point, and that's how your handicapping is done. So obviously if you've got a 10-kilometre difference in the size of your turn point versus another glider, your advantage is cumulative. So trying to keep up on leg one doesn't make any sense. Nonetheless, I tried and I paid a fairly high price for it. Although, having said that, my flying was decent enough that I got 4th place on the Australian OLC for this particular flight. So I didn't do too badly, considering that I messed up my first leg quite badly. And I messed up in a couple of places, actually. We'll have a look at that. But what I want to say is my thermaling improved dramatically, which is the goal that I had set myself based on my previous analysis. So now using IGC Spy, I can say, I've got my thermaling worked out. What I need to do now is concentrate on the next important piece, which for me, we will see, is deviations. So I started around about here. There's the start showing better now. So I started around about here somewhere. The other guys started over here. That was a better place to start from, but I really didn't get a chance to start from there. So the wind was coming from this direction, so actually mine was a better place to start from. Although it doesn't really matter in a GP. So I crossed the line. They were a few minutes ahead of me given my start, and they assembled over here somewhere. I took a climb on top of this hill under some gliders thinking it was them, but it wasn't them. I then went over, connected with them. Then I came across to this hill here, as did they, and really what you want to do in this local region is you want to connect with the clouds if you're flying in this direction, and I'll show you why. This is Mount Keepit, pretty decent sized mountain for our region, and a very strong convergence often sets up heading in this direction. If you connect with the convergence somewhere in the region of Mount Bora, this region here, you'll have a really good flight at high speed, and I've had a 100 kph flight overall using that particular convergence. The issue that I had was when I was trying to keep up with these guys, I always kept telling myself, it's okay, you'll connect with the cloud somewhere along here and you'll be fine. Well, those with better local knowledge tell me if you don't climb at Mount Bora and connect with the cloud there, you won't connect with it until Keepit. And that's exactly what happened to me. So while they were moving along here at 8,000 feet, I was struggling at 4,000 and 5,000 feet. I finally got to about 8,000, somewhere about here, opposite the peak of Mount Keepit. So then my circle was 14.5 k's here, so I came across from Keepit over to here, and then this region here was all blued out. There were clouds in the Pilliga scrub, which is down here, but there were no clouds in this region. I should have gone directly from here across to there, that little short distance, but I was convinced that the conditions were extremely weak here, and I could see a big cloud down here, and I just diverted way too much to get to it. I'd outlanded the previous day, and I think I just didn't want to inconvenience anybody with an outlanding from Narrabri. I should have just done what I should have done. Nonetheless, lesson learned. came down here and then ran across this way, connected with a circle about here, cut across the Pilliga scrub, took a massive climb, really fast climb, to 9,000 feet, and then had final glide all the way home. So final glide from here through Rangarai to home. And that really made up the difference. It made me quite fast on that bit of the flight because others were struggling around about here. So let's go back to the lesson learned from the previous flight. So those of you who've looked at that previous episode will know what we are looking at here, and I'll scroll my glider up to the top. So my flight time was 3 hours and 32, about 30 minutes slower than I really hoped it would be. Nonetheless, it was good enough to, as I say, get me in 4th place on OLC for that day and score me fairly well within the GP also. So what's interesting here is my much improved ratio here. Thermal glides to climbs, so 65.7% versus 28.5%, whereas in the kind of 32% region before for thermals. So my tries is only 5.6% of the time. It's come down from 10%. My distance deviated was still high, and we'll come to that. 25,000 feet of climbing, about the same loss as previously. My thermal altitude average about 1,200 feet, again pretty similar to everybody else. Here's a significant difference. My previous thermal orbit times was 35 seconds, and here it's 26. It's also 26 taking into account the first and last turns. So I'm establishing my thermals very quickly, and I'm orbiting just a second faster than probably what is optimum. But that's come down an incredible amount from where I was before. And that's entirely due to better angle of bank, because as you can see, my actual speed in knots in a thermal is around about 61 knots. Now you might think that's really quite fast, and it probably is a little, but those of you who've flown at Lake Keepit will know the thermals here are really quite rough at times. There are not only vertical gusts, there are horizontal gusts. And that can mean that it's very hard to keep a stable thermal turn going if you don't add a little bit of speed. It just adds more stability, and you don't lose height from getting sort of tipped up all the time. So what's improved my thermaling here is my orbit time, in other words, my angle of bank. The thermal variance is 4.1, which is pretty comparable to everybody except the gun here and the Speed Aster, who is a known good thermaler. And my thermal variance average, not counting the first 2 turns, is 4.5 knots versus 5.2 for the Speedy Gonzales. So, tries, 2,800 feet gained in my tries, 990 feet lost. 1.8 knots average, so my tries have even improved a little bit because I'm turning tighter. Here's one area where I missed out a bit this time, which I'm usually pretty good at. This just indicates that I kind of underestimated the conditions a little bit, especially out in the blue, and flew a little too slowly. Now, let's have a look how much time each of those things lost me, because before, my lost time due to poor slow climb was considerable. Now it's only 3.9%. So I had 4.1 knots versus 4.8 knots. I lost some speed at the start, but only 1.5%. So I lost some time at the start. The big time loss now is deviations. So here's the power of IGC Spy. I have managed to realize that thermaling needed improving, and improved it in a single flight because of the information that I got from IGC Spy, which was my orbit time was too long. So by increasing my bank angle, despite flying a little bit faster, I've got my orbit time down near to optimum, And now the only thing I'm left to work on really is lost time due to deviations. Now we're going to see why those deviations occurred in a little bit. I didn't really lose a lot of time anywhere else, but I surprisingly lost a little bit to poor Nito, which is telling me that my LD at any given point in the flight was not as good as it could have been. So I was flying 0.1 versus 1.2 for the best. So in other words, I was flying in poorer air than I should have been. And that's not surprising given the scenario that I just gave you, that every other competitor connected with the cloud on leg 1 and so were able to fly in that good energy under the convergence. I wasn't able to do that on leg 1, and that's where that comes from. So that 1,338 seconds, or I'm guessing around about 15 minutes, was lost primarily on leg 1, and the rest was lost here in the deviations in the weaker conditions near Weewa. So this is the power of this IGC Spy. Let's come down. I think what I will actually do now is I'll go to the analysis of my flight on the map, which we can do by selecting my call sign in this area over here, but I've already done it, so I'll have a look up here. So here we go. Here are my analysis according to the algorithms that Jaques has created here. So let's now go and have a look at the kind of information that you can draw from the map, which I said I would introduce you to the next time. Now this is a bit of wind on this day, but mostly the issue was that I missed the convergence. So when you look at the track of a JS1 or JS3 or something, you will see something that you don't see with my track. In fact, let's go and see if we can do that just for the moment. Go and select a long wings flight, and I'll select K1. Let's see if we can zoom in on K1's flight. Oh, it's not showing me what I expected it to show me. I don't exactly understand why not. Okay, I might have missed something in selecting the way that you look at this, but basically the colours represent lift or sink, and the thickness of the line should show the glider's speed, but for some reason it's not showing it. So let's just ignore that for the moment. So you can see here I am on tow. I pretty much take a thermal straight away, which is fairly decent, although not decent enough, as you can tell by the colours. And ultimately, after flying around a bit to get my height, I'm basically here just losing height to get my start going. And I messed up my start, so I did a couple of climbs here, and then it wasn't till here that I connected with these other gliders. And then attempted to follow them down track, picked up a bit of a climb there, took a few more here, realizing that I wasn't going to be able to get to the cloud if I didn't take a climb, and that's where I should have stayed and kept climbing, and I elected not to. Now, the interesting thing about this particular bit of software is these fires, if you want to call them that, represent potential thermal sources. So if I'm circling here and the wind direction is hit this way, then the software has determined that the likely source of the thermal is here. So that can build up an encyclopedia of local knowledge. So you can see all these thermals all along the way. Now, I should have been able to fly much straighter here. As you can see, I'm flying fairly straight, but I just didn't connect with the cloud well enough. And it wasn't until Mount Capital that I actually did that. And you can see I spent a fair bit of time trying to do so. Then I push out of the convergence, take a short climb there, and here's where it goes pear-shaped for me. So I fly into this circle, I make an obvious turn, and then I do the wrong thing. I deviate. I should have flown directly from here to probably here. But I was relatively low, and I took a climb here at Narrabri, or near Narrabri. And then lost a lot of time in this little loop here, which is where that deviation number comes in. Had a couple of attempts at thermals because I was quite low, and then managed to get a fairly decent climb just here. And the thermal source appears to be this little creek here in amongst the Pilliga scrub. So from here I pretty much had final glide to home, although I did do a couple of orbits here and there. It looks like it is straight home. I thought I did a couple of orbits. So there you go. That's the breakdown, if you like. So what I'm trying to say to you here is that when you use this tool in a competition, you get this really useful piece of information, or pieces of information. Some of it you can get from other analysis software, like your percentage of thermals versus glides and so on. But this orbit time is quite unique. And when you utilize orbit time, average climb rate, and speed in your turns, if you use all of these things here, you can work out what it is that's not allowing you to climb so quickly. And in a single flight, I was able to remedy that. I think that's remarkable. I hope you really enjoyed that episode, and please do check out the previous episode if you haven't done so despite my reminders. And also don't forget to subscribe, ring the notification bell, and give us a thumbs up. All of those things help us to attract more subscribers and help us attract sponsors. Thank you very much. I'm Kimberly Olsen. Goodbye till next time.